sure that if you're unable to send an email, you'll still be given an opportunity to speak after those who have. With that, our executive director was caught in traffic trying to get back from Europe, so won't be able to be joining with us today as he's in transit. But you know, but the team is prepared to make the presentation, having worked with our board team of Vice Chair Moyer and Director Alba, and so we'll get a briefing to Director Murphy after the fact, and he'll find out what all of you had to say. So this is mostly listen only for us too. Here at the board, we're looking forward to seeing the presentation. I know a lot of work has gone into this, and thank you and Director Alba for all the work you've put into this. It's really amazing. So big questions ahead. Take it away. Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Chair.
Kevin, can you unmute yourself?
Good. Is it? I'll just go. Thank you, Chair. Kevin Conley, Manager of Planning and Development here at WETA. And thank you for the acknowledgements at the outset. On the behalf of the project team, I think we'd also like to extend our double acknowledgement to the board subcommittee. Board Member Alba, who's with us on video, as well as Board Member Moyer, who've been with us throughout this whole process and have been instrumental in providing us the input that, for the product that you're going to see here. And also, very importantly, are the advisory committees that we've had along the way. And a lot of them will actually probably be here by video, and we're going to represent a lot of their input as part of this presentation. And in addition, the general public, of which case we had a very, very positive response rate in terms of a survey that we did. We'll share all the results of that survey as well as advisory committee input as we go along here. It's not just listen only. We encourage you to participate and jump in and talk as much as you'd like to. But let's just get right to it. We're going to share with you today evaluation of our different service visions, and we really provided the public and our advisory groups 4 different types of WETA futures. And what you'll see is what those futures are in terms of representative what they look like, and then the evaluation and the analysis of those futures against the various focus areas that we've identified as part of the business.
Thank you for
our agenda for today. Briefly, an RM3 update. Then we're going to get into the service vision, and then Mike will share with everyone the evaluation and outreach results, as well as the next step. A quick note about RM3. This intends to be quick, and really the idea here is that RM3, most of this work was produced and shared with our advisory committee and all of our stakeholders prior to learning the news about RM3. So the RM3 kind of news, which was always, of course, great news, wasn't really folded into the analysis and the visioning here. That is not to say there won't be so going forward. We intend that to be, but I need to make that kind of caveat up front that this is not an RM3 plan. It was never intended to be an RM3 plan. It was great news, and we, from this point forward, will be able to incorporate the presence of RM3 within our future. Obviously, we have candidate RM3 projects that are in our existing pipeline of projects, such as the Berkeley Redwood City Mission Bay project, as well as future projects that we have not even identified. As I said, the business plan will assume RM3 moving forward. The idea, though, on the business plan is that it's a far-reaching vision. It's a 25th vision, and RM3 is really a near-term program in the sense of that it's for the next 10 to 20 years. The business plan will certainly inform RM3 and how we do an expenditure plan in RM3 plan, which is a 5-year plan we're required to do as part of the legislation. The plan right now is to bring that plan to the board for the June meeting. So we're putting that out front to sort of preempt any discussion of an RM3 plan, which we are going to do as a board in the coming months. And the focus here is on service vision. So I'll go right into the various service visions that we shared with our stakeholders and we analyzed. The first is our current baseline. This is what we do today, and please keep an eye on the left-hand side of the slide, which are sort of our metrics. This is what we do today. We have 10 terminals, 6 routes, 16 vessels are in service today. The reason why we have a range there is that until 2050, we can expand service. We can add up to 26 vessels in operation without reaching any capacity limits in terms of our terminal operations. So we have the ability to increase service at existing terminals. The Planned Bay Area network takes our existing network, and as you can see, goes up to 14 terminals. And the new ones would be Treasure Island, Berkeley, Redwood City, as well as Mission Bay. This is part of the Planned Bay Area that the region adopted as part of NTC. Another key component of this is the enhancement of our existing service, in effect doubling our existing level of service. Everywhere we have our service, we go to 30 minutes. Everywhere we have 30 minutes, we go to 15-minute frequency. So it's a significant increase in terms of vessels in operation. Sometimes that was lost. I'll share with you with some of our advisory groups. They didn't see the Planned Bay Area concept as a big increase, but it is truly a big increase. It's a doubling of what we do today. The next vision was what we call core network. The core network really puts an emphasis on having more service in the existing network with some targeted expansion, in particular the Arquina Strait area, as well as the South Bay, and some short hop ideas. And that would be, for example, Hunters Point or Alameda Landing in Alameda, and then also incorporating something like Larkspur into our service as well, and finding more destinations within our existing network. In other words, linking something like Richmond to South San Francisco, not just Oakland to South San Francisco. As you can see here, we go to 17 routes. Again, we go up about 40% in terms of vessels over the Planned Bay Area. We go up to almost 60 vessels. And then finally, what we call the coverage network. And this is sort of it's multiple as maximum amount of lines on the map and points on the map that you can identify. It is a special caveat here that given today's technology, a lot of this would not be possible given dredging limitations as well as vessel time, travel time, that some of these long trips would just be infeasible in terms of today's vessel technology. But we're not letting technology limit us in terms of a vision. Again, it's a 2050. But this incorporates the concepts that are in the previous two. In other words, core improvement in terms of having more service within our existing network and going to other places other than San Francisco, as well as expanding into the North Bay and the South Bay, and linking places that are linked today in terms of travel piers. For example, Union City and Palo Alto, that the ferry is not an option for. And again, here we approach 90 vessels, 26 terminals. We don't list it here, but this would obviously need additional facilities, maintenance facilities, and things like that. So put it in terms of a graphic here, you can see the core network is sort of in between the two, our existing Planned Bay Area, as well as the coverage network. And staff is going to share their own recommendation, which is an optimized version of the core network, which really folds in much of the coverage network into the core network, into having sort of a blend of the two, a hybrid of the two. Ultimately, the product here that the board will be asked to adopt as an action will be in June. And it'll be a very simple, user-friendly product. It will be essentially a map with an accompanying policy statement, generally a one-page policy statement with a map. So that's where we're headed in terms of this workshop isn't meant to fully discuss all the options, but in June, we'll be coming back with it. And as I said, this is the service vision proposal that the staff is recommending. And it really takes that core network as a basis and optimizes it. We continue to improve our service into San Francisco. We expand Cross Bay in places strategically like Larkspur, for example, or Marin, connecting Marin to and Golden Gate service to WETA terminals. The short hop concept is part of this as well. San Francisco-based service, Mare Island, Vallejo, even places like Carquinez to Richmond. And we essentially keep the idea open to expansion far beyond that in terms of the South Bay and North Bay, but that really has to rely upon some pragmatic standards. We certainly heard, and you'll hear from many of our stakeholder groups, that cost effectiveness was a concern. That in today's environment where transit is struggling for ridership, people want to see the investment be proactive and pragmatic. And so our proposal really relies on the idea that we establish standards where an expansion terminal would have to meet sort of some effectiveness standards in order to be an investment in the future. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mike, who's going to share with us the results of the evaluation.
Thanks, Kevin. And I had a request to go full screen here.
Yeah,
Down.
fourth from the bottom.
Sorry, what? Oh, full screen. Okay. Right there. Does that work?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to give you a hopefully summarized version of the evaluation results. We attached a technical memo with 26 pages full of numbers and different metrics. That's a lot to get through. If you read it, great. If not, I'll try to summarize what's in there. So this is really the effort of our project team over the last 6 months. And the goal here is to really to undertake an evaluation that's going to provide the basis for ultimately getting to that service vision that we'll bring to you in June, and we'll consequently build the business plan around. This slide's another way to summarize what Kevin walked through with the different network options. So we show the 4 options that we considered baseline on Bay Area core coverage and compare them to what we operate today, the existing network. And again, as Kevin mentioned, every scenario represents a pretty substantial increase from what we do today. And they meter up, the more aggressive you get as you go into core coverage. So Kevin walked through the routes, terminals, peak vessels. As part of the work we did with evaluation, we put some definition to the service level. So that's the second to last column from the right. Articulates or projects the amount of service operated. And in all these scenarios, we tested relatively high levels of service. We really wanted to get a sense of what the maximum potential of all these routes were. And so we didn't want to kind of suppress demand in any way because there wasn't enough service offered. So we were pretty aggressive with that. And then we, for the purposes of the evaluation, we had to kind of come up with some projected operating costs. So these are very high level. In reality, if we were to pursue any individual route in whatever service vision we come up with, it'd be a much more nuanced process to really fine tune the service plan, the schedule of each route, to get at a precise cost. But for the purposes of this exercise, approach this at a very high level. So this is the evaluation in a nutshell. So we looked at each of the network options across 5 of the 6 focus areas that we defined as part of the previous effort in the project. The 6th focus area, organizational capacity, is going to be something we really look into as part of the business plan after we've zeroed in on a service vision. But this kind of just summarizes the results of the evaluation. And the way to read this, the green colors, the darker green colors, represents where a network performs better than Plan Bay area. I'm sorry, better than the existing network in a given focus area. The red indicates where a potential option performs worse than the existing network in a particular focus area. So, the spoiler here at a very high level is that none of the proposed networks, Plan Bay area, core, or coverage, performs the best in all the focus areas. So at the end of the day, to get to kind of coalesce around one of these networks to build the service vision off of, we need to kind of consider some trade. So for each of these focus areas, we evaluated a range of criteria or metrics. For regional ferry network, focus area 1, we looked at the ridership that each network would produce, the productivity of the services within that network, so how many passengers you would carry per hour. It's a key metric that WETA considers for service productivity. And then the number of transit gaps built. So in the existing network that we have today, in terms of regional transit, which network would do the most in terms of bringing new transit service to an area that transit service doesn't exist? Emergency response. It was pretty straightforward analysis. We looked at the capacity in terms of passenger seats and the reach. So the new shoreline locations that a given network would open up to provide emergency response services to. Environmental stewardship. We looked at the feasibility for the routes in a given network of operating zero emission vessels. And then we looked at the potential for projects within each alternative to have impacts on sensitive wetland areas or require substantial amount of dredging due to shallow water depth. Community connections. The first focus here was looking at, hey, so for a given network, how many populations and jobs does it capture? How much access are we creating? New access are we creating to WETA each of these networks? And then we specifically looked at, what does it do to promote equity? So how many equity priority communities would be in the catchment area? And then what can it do to promote housing and economic development? How many PDAs, as defined by MTC, are in the catchment area for each of these networks? And then lastly, obviously cost needs to be considered in all this. And so we looked at, for a given network, what would be the incremental subsidy required in the total, and then on a per passenger basis for each of the networks, as well as capital costs. So obviously, in addition to operating expenses, each of these networks would require a capital investment.
Why is the capital cost not any of those colors?
That's a typo. Yeah, I apologize for that. It's in the memo.
Okay,
But
obvious answer.
yeah.
Yeah.
So for Plan Bay area and core network, it's medium. So we use the kind of scale. For coverage network, it's high, and we'll make sure that gets corrected for the public service. With all that analysis done, we kind of synthesized it into some key findings for what expansion offers beyond that set of projects included in Plan Bay area. The first kind of finding is opportunities do exist to grow the WETA system. There are terminal sites, there are potential routes out there that can increase the number of passengers WETA serves and increase the reach of services along the shoreline of the Bay Area. With those opportunities, though, there are costs. A really key consistent finding through the evaluation that we did is the services that we operate today are relatively high demand. The future expansion projects beyond Plan Bay Area do have lower demand than the services we operate. And so there would be a diminishment in service productivity. That's more operating subsidy required to expand beyond Plan Bay Area. And the last kind of finding, and this one's really critical, several of the projects that expand beyond Bay Area do present significant environmental challenges as of today. And so Kevin mentioned we weren't necessarily going to be constrained by technology, limitations of the technology today. But it is important to address, based on what we have today, some of the projects that were under consideration would require or present significant obstacles in terms of wetlands, dredging, zero emission feasibility. So in terms of how the
In terms of how the evaluation feeds into our proposal,
proposal to build service station off of the core network. Because the host is muted me.
Oh.
No, you're good. So it's when there was an echo, so we turned off Tom. Yeah, so you're good. We can hear you.
So in terms of how the evaluation supports our proposal,
to build a service station off the core network. I'll just go briefly, focus area by focus area here and highlight some of the benefits and some of the pitfalls potentially avoided by converging on the core network. In terms of regional ferry network, it does take advantage of an opportunity to expand the enclave Bay Area. It acknowledges that a lot of these expansion candidates have relatively lower demand. And so the core network represents a more limited expansion beyond the Bay Area. That same expanded terminal capacity and road capacity would also enhance our emergency response capabilities as well. In terms of environmental stewardship,
unmuting. In terms of environmental stewardship,
Hi.
the core network prioritizes routes
Hi.
where zero emission vessels are feasible and largely avoids projects that present the biggest challenges with the environmental constraints we mentioned in terms of wetlands, dredging, and zero emission vessels. Community connections, while not providing as much expansion as the coverage option, you do open up new PDAs and equity priority communities under the core network. And as a lot of our stakeholders
mentioned as we presented these results,
it's not simple enough to just have PC present within
the system. There's a lot more that goes into making equity work, making access to new development sites work with ferries. And there was a real kind of consistent reminder to also pay attention to first last mile. So I think it's important to note there will be other policy work and other strategy that comes to bear as we go forward with the business plan. And we can't just look geographically at what what an option does in terms of promoting equity or economic development. It's more than just the presence of the terminal. There's a lot of supportive policy that goes into it as well.
Could I ask a quick question about that?
Yeah.
So, okay, in that vein, did we look at, so environmentally, potentially, I don't know if you looked at it or not. If you put terminals in more places, obviously more development is more impact on the environment, but if you're bringing more population close to the bay, where it's cooler, where people don't need to use air conditioning and, we have a more temperate climate, so those are favorable environmental conditions. Did we look at those? Did we measure that or consider any of that? Plus the economic development and equity consideration, but.
The short answer, we weren't able to kind of address those directly in the evaluation results. I think those are important considerations, and they're always hard to factor in those types of externalities when you're looking at something very targeted. And I don't think that these have to necessarily represent game stoppers, but for the project team, it gave us pause in terms of how aggressive we wanted to be in kind of bringing on some of those challenges. Perhaps in some instances they're warranted and there are other considerations, which is why we're not kind of strictly going with the core network. We're looking to optimize it, also bring in some criteria for how other terminals be considered that don't necessarily benefit the core.
Like Seaplane Lagoon, we were somewhat reactive about that, I think. But basically, the development opportunity at the Naval Air Station made the terminal a possibility, and the terminal made the development a possibility. And at the end of the day, it seems like that's beneficial to the Bay Area to have people living close to the Bay and creating that kind of an environment and utilizing underserved area.
Well, I think that's a good point. Chair Wonderman, because one of the things we talked a lot about in the committee was to be, 2050 is alternatively close when you're talking about capital investment of this magnitude and far when you're trying to have the crystal ball, right?
Right.
Even 2019 to today, there's no crystal ball for that. And so we talked a lot about trying to devise a vision that would have enough agility and flexibility in it to, as you said, be able to respond to those opportunities
Mhm.
like Seaplane Lagoon, and others, but at the same time, kind of have a plan and a vision that would stay the course more or less, and keep us moving forward, absent other factors that might put something as a sooner priority. So, not that we've landed on that, or that the team has landed on that yet, but I would encourage you to think about that as Mike's presenting.
Thank you.
And I think we do have a slide that'll, and thank you, Director Moyer, a slide that kind of summarizes that notion as well of, staying open-minded to things that other considerations than what we directly looked at. Community connections, to cover that. Lastly, financial capacity. Again, it's this notion of the more lower demand services you add, the larger financial strain it incurs on the system. And in support of kind of building around the core network kind of moderates those two dynamics. So it limits the number of lower demand services you're bringing in and kind of doesn't incur the most severe kind of additional subsidy that would be required if you do something like we got a couple more slides here, and before we wrap up the evaluation summary. This is a slide on the 2050s future. And if you'll recall from the first workshop, one of the approaches we had for the project was acknowledging that we don't know what the future is going to be like. A lot of projects are set up to look at the four alternatives we looked at and make kind of a single assumption about what the future is going to look like. I think in the times we live now with, emerging from the pandemic, there's even more reason to be kind of skeptical that we know what the future is going to look like. And so we set up a scenario planning process whereby rather than kind of evaluating against one future, we define 4 different futures. And this kind of shows, where those futures lie. We really differentiated by 2 factors. The first factor is travel behavior. And that was a question of, are people going to kind of continue to travel and work in the way that they do today? Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe a half day here, half day there. Or are we going to kind of return back to the way things were in 2019 before the pandemic started? And so we thought that was a really key kind of question mark in the future. And we wanted to test how these networks performed in both scenarios. The second one was really, the direction the Bay Area as a whole wants to go in terms of transit. And this would pertain to WETA. Do we want to go to a system service design that's more like what we had in 2019, when the service was really focused on commuters and clustered in the peak period, AM and PM on the weekdays? Or do we want to do something like what WETA's experimented with the pandemic recovery program and spread that service more evenly throughout the day? Maybe shift some service from the peak hour to midday periods and invest in weekend service to serve a broader market of people. And so these 4 options kind of fall in different quadrants across those 2 factors. In terms of the findings for the scenario planning analysis, the high-level finding was all the network options actually performed best in the Charter New Course and Tack to the Wind future. And the thing that those 2 futures have in common is that they assume a transit policy that supports an all-day service. And so I think that's a really important finding and supportive of the direction that WETA's gone in terms of the pandemic recovery program to really make this shift, to spreading our service out more evenly throughout the day.
In terms of some findings for individual network concepts across all 4 futures, Plan Bay Area in all 4 futures was proved to be the most productive and cost efficient of the options. The coverage network had kind of the highest upside, the highest potential ridership, but also substantially high cost associated with delivering that network. And again, as we kind of mentioned along the way, the core network kind of fell in between the two. So you do get some expansion, you get additional costs, but they are ramped down compared to the coverage option. And this last slide, I think kind of speaks to the point you were making, Director Wunderman, earlier. What about, how do we represent projects that we don't think could happen today, but could happen in the future? And this is really an acknowledgement that, things like the seaplane situation could happen. There could be a transformative change in the underlying housing and development plans for a site. There could be the introduction of a new technology that addresses some of the environmental challenges a project faces today. And there could also be new funding that emerges, funding that wasn't anticipated in this work that we did. And this is all to say that wouldn't stop us from pursuing those projects. This would be something we continually monitor, but given what we know today, that would be, what the service vision reflects. And I'll pause here for just a second. So that's the summary of the evaluation results. We actually had a facilitator consultant, Civic Makers, that's been leading our public outreach process. Unfortunately, they're out sick today. So I'll take care of this. So similar to the outreach we did for the first workshop where we defined the network alternatives, we met with the advisory groups, the community advisory group, the business advisory group, as well as 6 or 7 county level working groups to review the evaluation results with them and get their feedback. In total, there are 90 to 120-minute meetings that the project team did over the last 6 months. And these were in addition to some community-based organization listening sessions that were held to offer kind of a special one-on-one opportunity for groups that haven't traditionally participated in our long-range planning process to participate. This is a summary of some of the feedback we got from the CBO listening sessions. This is a really valuable input for this project, but also for WETA going forward about how we can engage with these groups, what their priorities are, how they, what strategies are most successful for getting them involved in our processes. And then we also again met with the community and business advisory groups and kind of synthesized some of the key findings that we had from those groups in this slide. As Kevin mentioned, there was some concern about the ability of WETA to deliver its current plans by becoming too aggressive in potential expansion in the future. There was a pretty clear sense that we should remain open-minded to new technologies coming online and not necessarily be constrained, by what we have today in terms of what we're planning for 2050. And then again, as I mentioned, a real focus on paying attention to first last mile connections when it comes to promoting terminal access and connecting to equity priority communities. And before I lose any more of my voice, I'm going to turn it over to Gabe to run through the rest of the public outreach.
Thanks, Mike. So as we mentioned before, we met with 6 different county level working groups throughout the outreach process over the past few months. This was a combination of both county level kind of planning staff as well as municipal staff of cities that are either in the current network or interested in kind of having the WETA network expand to their locales. And of note, in this last round of outreach, we also included Santa Clara County. They had not previously been engaged with us before January of this year. So some of the key takeaways that we kind of found when we were talking to these county level working groups, especially in San Mateo and Santa Clara County, there was a concern about the environmental impacts, especially in kind of a region of the Bay where we have a lot more shallow water, as well as sensitive kind of shoreline habitats. And a lot of those kind of concerns have already been codified in local plans in kind of San Mateo and Santa Clara County. So things like protecting certain wildlife species that are vulnerable in those areas, that was something that came to the fore in those meetings. Another thing that we kind of picked up on was the concern about system productivity declining as we expand kind of beyond the core network. So we heard this especially from our partners in San Francisco and Alameda counties, as well as in Solano County with the Vallejo service. Maintaining kind of a high efficacy on the existing system was really important to those stakeholders. And then the last thing that we kind of picked up on was the kind of flexibility of our project delivery, especially for kind of projects that kind of are on the fence in terms of their feasibility right now. So a lot of projects kind of in the Carquinas where there is a strong desire to have ferry service, but at this time currently not necessarily the ridership demand or kind of the population that would support a robust kind of regional WETA style ferry service. There was desire to kind of look at those projects again with kind of a different lens and see if there were alternative kind of operating arrangements that could be worked out so that we could deliver ferry service to those areas kind of in a different model than what we do today. And that kind of in turn would allow greater access to WETA and the ferry, kind of beyond what we see in our existing system. So in addition to all of the county level working group meetings, we also conducted an online public survey that was open from January 30th through March 24th. We got just over 4,500 responses. And the questions were focused mainly on the trade-offs and how we move forward in the future, balancing affordability, service frequency, speed, coverage, as well as the environment. And the survey was also offered in Spanish and Chinese. And then there were also some incentives for people taking the survey. We gave away a $50 Clipper card to a lucky survey winner, as well as some WETA merchandise. So we're going to dive into some of the survey results. Who did we hear from? In terms of race and ethnicity, it was overwhelmingly almost 60% white and Caucasian respondents. And this is, I think, disproportionately higher than what we see in the actual WETA ridership today. The Asian Pacific Islander group, I think, of note, is a little bit underrepresented. And then Hispanic, Latino, and Spanish origin as well. So in terms of gender, we had majority female respondents. And then in terms of income, the largest groups that responded were in that kind of 100 to 150,000 annual income range. And then if we break down the respondents by county, we had a large plurality of respondents from Alameda County, which makes sense. We have a lot of our current service that operates out of Alameda County right now. And then right behind that, we had about 18% from Solano County, 11.5% from Contra Costa, and about 10% from San Francisco. So some of the key takeaways that we kind of pulled out of the survey. Number one, people are concerned about trip frequency and kind of the quality of service. And that's kind of what people care about most when they want to take the ferry. Some of the secondary concerns that came up were also the number of transit connections available, as well as the travel time and the cost of the ferry. So here we're going to dive into some of the individual questions that were asked on the survey. This one is, what are the most important factors when deciding whether to take the ferry? And then one is, rank one is most important, and then the number that's higher would be least important. So here we can see there was kind of an overwhelming signal that the departure schedule was something people cared about. And then following that, time to complete the trip, number of connections needed to complete the trip, and then the cost. I think one thing to note on this question is that trip amenities and the environmental impacts of their trip were ranked at the lowest priority. This
That
is-
chart's so confusing.
Sorry, Monique, if you-
Sorry, the charts, if you, yeah. So the longer the bar implies, the more important it is.
So the shorter the bar.
I
is
know
more
what you're telling me, but the normal way to read that would be more people rank it higher.
Yeah.
I find that confusing. This is the second or third time I've seen it.
I was confused too. I did a double take when I read the materials.
We might want to look at that before it gets published too much more widely.
Mhm.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
to interrupt you.
So the next question we took a look at, service changes that would most influence
Okay.
people to ride the ferry more
Hey,
often.
this is Jessica. I don't know.
And here we see overwhelmingly increasing the number of daily trips is what people want. And then after that, reducing the number of connections and reducing the fare. And so I think of note again here is that the emissions response came in at the bottom. And so, we're getting a strong signal here that people really care about the quality of the service, where it goes, how frequently it runs. So this next question, top reasons for not taking the ferry. We had a plurality, about 45% respond that they do not live close enough to a ferry terminal, and that's the reason why they don't take the ferry. And there's some communities where we just cannot reach because of the nature of the
Of the
geography.
folks who responded, 4,500, how many of them took the ferry?
I don't know off the top of my head, but we do
Had
have
an answer.
that data.
Okay.
So yeah, we can get it to you. Yeah. And then after not living close enough, 28% responded they do not travel where the ferry goes. So it's both an origin and destination kind of issue here. So this next one I found particularly interesting. The likelihood of riding the ferry if, and then each of the statements below, people were able to respond to each of those individually, with either them being less likely to take the ferry or more likely to take the ferry, or no difference. And so I think of note, these first two, if the trip is slower but more environmentally friendly, 48% of respondents said it would not impact their decision on taking the ferry. And then secondly, if the trip was slower than other options but had more amenities, 47% said it would make no difference. So again, we're kind of seeing that among the survey respondents, the amenities and the environmental impact don't weigh as much on their decisions about riding the ferry. And then these last two on the right, I think are also pretty interesting. If there are more destinations that require more connections, people would be less likely to take the ferry. So they want kind of direct trips. And then if there are more destinations but fewer trips per route, they would be less likely to take the ferry as well. So even if we were in a kind of service scenario where we had a really expansive service across the bay, but maybe frequencies and headways that were only 60 to 90 minutes, that's not as attractive of an option for people. So this one, we have most important 2050 ferry service outcomes, with 1 being most important, 8 being least important. And here we see, again, the same signal, ridership, service coverage, those came to the fore. And then kind of at the back end, we had equity, emergency response, and financial balance. And so, interpret these results how you will, but I think a lot of kind of the stuff that came out as less important to survey respondents are things that the agency deals with at like at the management level of the service, right? Whereas what people care about individually is kind of what affects their own lives, and not necessarily thinking about the system overall. So that's kind of what we took out from the survey. So with that, we'll open it up for discussion. And Mike, do you want to come up?
Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, just to kind of second Gabe's observation, it is really interesting, what's on somebody's radar as an individual versus an organization. Because when we were doing the advisory groups and working groups, equity, environment, and financial and emergency response, all those things that were on the kind of tail end of the individual's perspective, those were really central to the groups that we talked to. So I just want to, second Gabe's kind of point on that one. You've heard us talk a lot. We are really looking forward to hearing your perspective on kind of the information that we presented, questions, comments, feedback on, what we've kind of proposed as our path forward between now and ultimately when we bring potentially a final version of that to you in June. So I'll cede the floor.
Well, first, thank you for the great presentation, and very complex, and all of this is taking place during the pandemic, when we've had significant changes. So the comments about the crystal ball, we wish we had those. We don't have them, or they don't work that well. And we also didn't figure RM3 into the mix, so which is sort of a big variable in there, but we really couldn't do that. So we were there, so that's a big issue. I'll just say a couple of things. I'll open it up. I'm interested to hear what other folks say, because the argument that you want to be more secure and stable, doing what you do well, versus recognizing that there's a bigger underserved region is profoundly important question. And I always came at it from the point of view that a little bit of build it and they will come, which may be wishful thinking, but we can't necessarily write off the fact that if you created a big network, that more folks wouldn't be attracted to it. And it's the sort of limitations of the network that that kind of hold people back. It doesn't come to my area, so I don't even think about taking the ferry. And then there's the development aspects of this, which at the time we thought about the legislation that created WETA, we were really thinking about the development inducements that went along with ferry service. So, and I don't think, especially with regional measure 3, we have a certain amount of leverage should we choose to, take it, because we could say to a community, we'll give you a terminal, we'll invest in a terminal, but you have to achieve a certain density, within a half mile of the terminal, or else we won't do it. So if we think that's important, a lot of planners, I think MTC probably thinks it's important, state legislation around CEQA exemptions for development, near transportation, think that's important. So maybe that's important. Of course, a lot of things we think are important, apparently the public doesn't think are important, which came out of the survey, which is very, very interesting. So we're focused on a lot of things that the public, and we have obligations, and maybe we see things from a different lens. But when you see those numbers, it makes you think, well, no wonder the public doesn't like government, because the government's off doing this, that's us, the government. And then, what they really want is that. That's what they really care about. Things, Gabe, that, matter to them on a daily basis. So, all that to be taken into consideration. But, I think, all of the, considerations for sort of how you look at this in the different scenarios are all, pretty valid. Personally, I favor a more aggressive, have always preferred a more aggressive stance on this. believing that, we have some obligation. It's beyond just analysis. We have a certain amount of obligation as the Bay's water transit agency to reach out to the Bay and enable people to participate. And it was mentioned, I think, in some of the commentary that, smaller boats, future kinds of vessels. I mean, we looked at hovercraft. Do they have an application? Maybe future electric hovercraft. I don't know if those have been invented yet, but probably could be invented. So there's a lot of, future potential, but maybe, I think what you're saying is let's get to a place where we could do that, but let's do what we know how to do and have a higher degree of confidence in doing and, kind of set that as our vision. So I'm not sure yet, I would, if we were supposed to vote on this today, I don't think I would know how I would vote on it, but this is all really good information, I think, for us to internalize. Are we done with the public input? Is there, can the public still go online and weigh in, or have we closed the book on that?
With the survey that we presented the results for, that's been closed. But in general, the public outreach is going to continue past the service vision phase of the project as we begin drafting the business plan. But in terms of gathering input on identifying a preferred service vision, there was an additional public outreach that is planned right now.
Because one good way to ask a question to someone is say, I'll give you $100 and here's some choices of how to spend it. And that helps the mind, really think it through, right? I mean, $20 on this and $8, and so forth. And with regional measure 3, we actually have those numbers in hand. So it might, for folks, maybe this isn't the time to do it, but to kind of help the public and all of us really clarify, what it is we think is a priority, because it's kind of substantial. So that, I think I'll stop there and I'll open it up to other members of the board, and then we'll hear from the folks tuning in. Who'd like to, what brave soul, Pippin? Go ahead,
I'm
Pippin.
happy to go first.
Yeah.
Y'all can hear me with the microphone over there, but so I had some questions like I noticed that in none of the plans is there a connection from Vallejo to Larkspur. Was there a reason that was not explored?
Wait, don't go away.
There wasn't necessarily a distinct reason. I think it probably could have been a candidate project in the core network where we look at, taking existing facilities and doing different routes. I think one way to, approach the service vision is that it's trying to express a theme of projects. And, we could probably, that's probably a way we can optimize where we're at right now with what we bring to you in June, is to kind of have that come out more clear. Because certainly Vallejo to Larkspur would be the type of service, if the demand existed, that would be consistent with the core network option. So we can take a look at it, potentially seeing if that fitted with the service vision.
Yeah, I would certainly be interested to know all of the commuters on 37 that are just spending about 4 hours a day on that trip.
Yeah.
If there would be some interest in that and helping getting those cars off the road. And then I'm curious why we looked at Vallejo to Oakland and not like Vallejo to Richmond.
The Vallejo to Oakland, we really leaned on, we also have a technical consultant that's been helping us with the project, Fair and Peers. And so they identified that as a corridor that had potentially higher demand than the service from Vallejo to Richmond. And that's just based on overall travel patterns and, the relative competitiveness of the ferry and capturing a share of that. So that was kind of the logic.
Yeah, I was hoping that was the answer. I just wanted to check on that. And then, I certainly hear from elected officials that touch the waterfront all of the time as far as expansion of service being of interest, like Hercules and Martinez and Antioch and Benicia, and most recently Sassoon City also expressed a strong interest. And so I'm more like pro-aggressive on that as well, but I am also, wanting to be fiscally responsible, of course. That is our duty. But I think that, I think with the RM3 funds being freed up, there is some ability to do some pilot projects to see how, we could best expand and having that focus also on emergency preparedness. I think that is important. And just, keeping in mind, like for Solano County, anybody going to San Francisco, they're paying 2 bridge tolls every time. And so, we're our median income is around $86,000 per year. And certainly, one of the most disadvantaged communities in the Bay Area. So wanting to make sure that we are being aware of that and how we can help them be able to utilize this service.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Jeff?
No, I thought it was good information, good report. Some of it, I don't think is that surprising to me, like the environment. I think we focus on that. I think we've been focusing on, equity, and I definitely think we've been focusing on cost. So it's good to hear like those are important to people out there too, because I think that's, as a board, I think we're pretty conscientious about that. I also kind of lean in where Jim's at. Like, I guess I kind of feel like some of the things we've learned from the past, South City got built, didn't really produce what it did, but then we did it, the terminal in Richmond that blew up. Or, that just like the fact that people were, going to take that and that service really took off. So I think being flexible is definitely good. So we can, we'll have the opportunity to try some things. Maybe they don't work out, but maybe they do. Like, we got to look at that. And then I think the North Bay connection is a huge thing. I think that's something like, I don't know, like 37 is one issue, but I hear from people all the time that it doesn't make sense why they can't get on the ferry and get back and forth. So those are some of my thoughts, but I thought the report's good. I definitely feel like I'd like to keep our options open and explore a lot too. So.
We had a nice trip a couple of weeks ago along the northern waterfront of Contra Costa. And you've got 4 hungry cities there, a couple of them with well-developed thoughts and plans. And, it's hard for me as a Contra Costan to think about, we develop a long-term vision and that whole portion of Contra Costa is not in it because it's seen as kind of underproducing or, we don't really know. And, in Pittsburgh, for example, they were really, I was really impressed with what they had, how fully they had thought through and the kind of development they were doing, and so forth. So, Monique?
Well, I've had a lot to say in the subcommittee.
Well, now what do you think?
So, so what I will say is I'd just like to express my gratitude to Mike and Kevin and Gabe and all the team, because there's just a tremendous amount of work that has gone into this. And the logic with which they've approached it, the steadfastness with which they've approached it, the willingness to take feedback has been exemplary. I've been very, very appreciative of this effort. And I think just the ability to see the plan laid out in this grid of comparisons, I think is very helpful. As I mentioned earlier, to try to wrap your mind around a plan that goes out to 2050 when it's really hard to figure out what does 2025 look like is it's a huge effort. It's a very big ask. And I'm hoping that it's a vision that can be evergreen, and that it can be a good roadmap. I align, as do all of you, I think, with the concept that we can leverage many of the different vessel types that we've been working with to do some pilots or to do some test cases. And then I do think we have to be very, very mindful of where the population is so that we can stay true to part of our mission, that is emergency response. And I really like that attribute. of all, whether it's Plan Bay Area or core network or even the coverage network. I think that's a critical factor, as well as all the other things. One of the things that I do still struggle with is when we do look at the demographics of the survey respondents. They tend to lean, I think, to those folks who are riders today, not necessarily to those folks that we would like to be our riders tomorrow. And so I worry that that we'll miss out on an opportunity if we're not careful. So I want to be mindful about that. And I think that's the point that the three of you have made so far.
Really important.
But thank you, team, again, for an exemplary effort to date. And to all the members of the public who have dedicated time and energy to being at all those different meetings. Really appreciate that as well.
Thanks, Monique. Jessica?
Yep, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, great. So first off, I would like to thank the entire project team and consultants for all of the extensive stakeholder and public outreach that has been informing both the service vision and the business plan. So it's wonderful to have been on this subcommittee with Director Moyer and seeing the impact that both the public and our stakeholders and Director Moyer and I have had in this process so far. And I agree with the directors that have already shared that we have so many competing interests, and it all depends on whether you're a specific existing rider today. Of course, you want more service, but if you're thinking for the region, we want to absolutely think about environment and equity and everything. And I think we have the right mindset and the stepping stones to achieve so many of these goals. And as we've mentioned already, in regards to a more nimble fleet, smaller vessels, partnerships, and that may be public-private partnerships. It might be partnerships with communities and cities that have a strong desire to expand where they are. And so I think it's fantastic work so far, and looking forward to continue building on the information that we're gathering through the public outreach process. And I'm wondering if there's a way to weigh the survey responses, since we have such a big pool, weighing the survey responses against the region, just to make sure that we're accurately capturing what is really behind some of the skewness of the data. But I think generally everything that has been shared today is probably true. And so it's more just making sure that we're not overinflating something or under assuming something else.
Thanks very much, Jessica. That's great points. Okay. I wanted to ask one other question. I've worked on 2 projects in the Bay Area that were extension projects. There have been others, of course, but the two I worked on was BART to SFO and the Oakland Airport connector. So both of those were pretty big investments that were designed to take advantage of the reality that airports are like really important, and intense destinations where people go, and which the transportation system has to get people to, and they cause traffic jams and all of that. And so I don't understand the Bay the way you folks do. I know it has, there's a lot to something like this, but it always seemed to me that if we could get to SFO and or Oakland Airport, that would be those would be game changers. They'd bring the vessels into another part of the Bay. We're not far away at South San Francisco, and we're planning to bypass it to Redwood City. But I'm wondering, has there ever been a look at, a work with the planning staff of the airports to see if there was a way we could get people out of their cars and, or inferior forms of transportation for those? It's kind of you know, the BART run to SFO, it's not really an ideal run. You know, it goes around the whole, you know, perimeter of the city. So anyway, has that been considered?
So we ran a pilot with with SFO, I want to say about about maybe 4 years ago. And, you know, our service in South San Francisco is limited. You know, you would have to have the absolute perfect flight departure time to make that an option. It was decent in terms of employees at the airport. They did.
But Kevin, it only went to South San Francisco. It did not, you know, you needed a 20-minute shuttle. That, you know, one of the things we saw from the survey is people don't want to like get off a thing and get on another thing. So I'm talking about a terminal that would directly serve the airport or would have a connector to it that would be, you know, very, you know, like you would find at an airport. You know, you'd get off the thing and you get on the people mover and they already have. So I don't know, is it possible?
So, well, one of the purposes of that pilot was from the airport's perspective to understand better utilization, because they were going through expansion plans at the time. They were considering the possibility of siting a ferry. And since then, we haven't heard much from them. I think they moved in another direction.
Could I ask, we just, you know, I'm happy to, you know, the executive director of both airports are on my board. You know, I haven't really talked to them about it, but I'd be happy to, you know, pull a group together and see, even if ferry fit goes from one airport to the other, it would seem like it might make some sense. But anyway, could we look at it?
Absolutely.
One challenge, from a transportation planning perspective, the frequency expectation in terms of getting home on transit, even with BART, which runs relatively frequent service at 20 minutes, people, they land at the airport, they want to just get on with their ride and get home. From a ferry perspective, getting even to 20 minutes, which isn't that frequent, but beyond that would be a pretty incredible lift. And that's not to say there's not, a use case where it could make sense, but it's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I would further say that having worked on this with airport connecting the transit projects,
but at the airport.
the successes in the United States are very, very. It's just not
Board field trip.
including in our own area here and one in Los Angeles. And New York. It's a very, very challenging connection.
I'm sure there's a lot of security issues that are bound too. Okay, let's go to the listening, participating public. Melanie, are there folks who have signed up to provide comments?
Yes, the first one is Mr. Fielder. Mr. Fielder, if you're on the line, please unmute yourself. Mr. Fielder, we'll come back to you.
Oh,
Let
I'm
me hear
here.
before
I'm
we get
here.
to the.
Oh,
Oh, God, okay, go ahead. David Fielder.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak today. David Fielder, I'm a 50-year resident of Berkeley. My goal today is to make you aware of the growing resistance to siting a high-capacity ferry terminal at the Berkeley Pier. I'm part of a group called Save the Berkeley Pier, which is focused on returning that pier to its iconic status as a regional public recreational resource. We do not believe it is necessary to dramatically change the nature of the Berkeley Marina in order to accomplish that. Although several commercial ferry operations currently are based within the harbor basin, my understanding from WETA management is that such an approach will not be considered. Increasing resistance to turning Berkeley's largest park area into a commuter hub is partly based on the following. Number one, the impact of commuter parking on public access to this area for actual recreational use. Number two, the expected impact on wildlife from additional traffic, ferry noise, and diesel emissions. Number three, the likelihood that Berkeley will be expected to subsidize an increasing portion of ferry terminal permitting, design, construction, and operational costs. And finally, major environmental regulatory hurdles that have yet to be addressed, including CEQA, BCDC jurisdictional issues, and Berkeley's own 1986 Measure L. We will be urging our council to step back and instead focus on replacement of the 3,000-foot portion of the original pier that was so valued by the public until its closure in 2015. In closing, I'll directly quote our own mayor, Jesse Arreguín, from an email dated April 11th. I fully support and believe full pier restoration must be part of any plan for the waterfront, whether or not we have a ferry. We agree with Mayor Arreguín that pier replacement must not be held hostage by ferry terminal problems and trust that our perspective will prevail. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Fielder. I just would say for the record that, Mayor Arreguín's been before this board on several occasions and coordinated meetings with Berkeley City Planning and others, and, strongly asking us to partner with Berkeley to build that terminal. So, we could ask him maybe what his thoughts are at this point. Maybe he's changed his mind, but he's been before us a number of times, adamantly supporting. We understand your concerns and appreciate your commentary.
Thank you.
Kelly Hammergren.
Thank you. When I was looking at the report, I was really concerned about the environmental impact on tidelands, wetlands, and we are really in a crisis in biodiversity. Many species are on the verge of collapse. Wildlife, especially even our water birds, are threatened, and I see the kind of expansion that you're talking about that's going to have an environmental impact as really being irresponsible in consideration of the future. I know that as board members, you're looking at how you can expand service, but as a member of the public and someone who watches what is happening with our environment, with the climate and warming, I am just absolutely so concerned about the impact of expansion. And to encourage people to move closer to the water when we're going to be facing more and more sea level rise, I just think that's also irresponsible. I'm sorry to say that, but I would really like to hear a lot more about consideration for the impact of the ferry service on the environment, biodiversity, and fragile habitat. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, certainly it's one of the issues that the team raised, and that's why it's part of the consideration. And nothing happens. These are big projects and big considerations, and I think nothing happens without a very full and potent environmental review. I probably speak for the board and the community of WETA in saying that we don't want to harm, present any harm to the environment. We'd like to coexist with the environment and be supportive of it at every opportunity. Thank you, appreciate it, Ms. Hammergren. Howard Wong, please.
Hello, Howard Wong. I'm with the San Francisco Community Group. The Bay Area has a very low transit modal share. I think about 75% of trips are still by car. And the reason for that is many cities and counties just don't have much transit. So I think there's a need to focus on ferries as a very efficient way of increasing transit modal share in the Bay Area. Ferries, I think, don't require the infrastructure of tunnels, highways, bridges. The waterways already exist. I think it could be a very good argument for best economic investment in infrastructure that brings the most potential new ridership. I think another emphasis to make is that ferries are very flexible and adaptive to climate change with floating terminals and floating infrastructure. The emergency flexibility of ferries is a very important part of the consideration, because if highways and bridges and underground infrastructure is damaged, the waterways will still be available for ferries. So I think it's important to factor in somehow the cost of not having to rebuild damaged infrastructure is much better if you invest in floating terminals and ferry systems. And then I think a good way of helping people visualize a large ferry system is to look at case studies. And I think there should be an emphasis on studying pre-1933 Bay Area when we did not have the Golden Gate Bridge or the Bay Bridge. And most regional transit was by ferry, and there were about 250 boardings a day. And I think we should look at the existing large ferry systems in the world. For instance, Istanbul, which has 300,000 boardings a day. Take a look at New York and Manhattan's expanding ferry system and the Scandinavian system. So I think ferry is the most potential, I think, of most transit infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks, and we'll send you an application to join the board, Mr. Wong. That was really well said, and I think speaks to the passion that we have for the ferry system and wanting it to be all it can be in a region where, as you say, we still stick to automobile trips, and in fact, single occupant automobile trips is the major way people get around, and any way we can mitigate that, has tremendous human and environmental benefits. Alexander Walker, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alexander Walker Griffin here, Mayor of Hercules. I wanted to commend the staff and the team for this amazing plan, but I also wanted to emphasize the great city of Hercules to join the core group. Hercules is the intersection of the East Bay and into the greater Bay Area. And I will say this as someone who grew up in this area, from Pinole to Crockett, it's about 60,000 people who live in that area. And given that most of us, as mentioned in that PowerPoint, don't take the ferry either in Vallejo or Richmond because it's out of the way. If you're going to Vallejo, you're backtracking. If you're going to Richmond, from the Richmond ferry to Hercules is about a 30-minute drive. And at that point, I'm halfway to San Francisco, so I might as well keep going. So this, to emphasize Hercules being a part of the core group, is not only thinking about our region, but the greater Bay Area. If you go to the Safeway here in town at the gas station, and you talk to most people who are filling up their gas tanks or shopping at the store, a good majority of them don't live in Hercules. They're on their way going out to the inner East Bay, or they're going out to the North Bay. And if we can capture those riders here in town, I think it's not only going to benefit our environment, but get more cars off the road. And a little bit of a history lesson. There's a reason why we're the dynamic city. Once upon a time, Hercules had a dynamite facility. And at that dynamite facility, we had a ferry that allowed our dynamite to go to and from our city and around the world, wherever we needed it to go. So I wanted to remind the board that Hercules, we're not only just excited and enthusiastic about this, we want it to happen here, and the rest of our communities around us support it. So thank you again, board, for all that you've done. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor Griffin, and we appreciated you and the group from your city and the great exposure you gave us on that rainy morning a few weeks ago to the possibility. And we did. I think one of the key points made back to you in terms of feedback was the parking. The availability of sufficient parking, per the comments you've made. I think hopefully you're taking that to heart and really looking hard at what could be done to ensure that those folks who are traveling, as you said, would have access to stop in Hercules and take the ferry across. So, but thank you for that. Melanie, there are other folks. I don't see any hands, but sometimes people are there.
Nobody else has signed up.
Would anyone who has not raised their hand, if you wish to make a comment, this would be a good time to do it. Okay, we'll consider the public comment period closed. And how about members of the board? Would you like to make further comment?
One question, or just if it got talked about, and I know we've talked about this in the past, and Richmond did, is, you know, these communities that want this service, there was been a lot of, when it comes up, there's a lot of emphasis put on WETA that we have to pay for everything. Like, you know, this is the way it's going to go. And there's money, but it's not, unlimited money. So I didn't know if the group had talked or like looked at making part of the plan, like, you know, some kind of language where, you know, if a community is willing to put some skin in the game, like they, you know, that might help us out too, being like Richmond did or somebody else. Because I think once we put a document like this out, we've done this before, all of a sudden now everybody thinks, well, we're just going to come in and pay for everything. Just that doesn't happen out there. You know, it would be impossible to do these projects. So I don't know if we need to put something in there or have something once this final document's done that addresses that maybe.
Yes,
that food for thought.
we're certainly not the bank of WETA, as some people seem to think we are.
We do have a few wrap-up slides that do speak to.
Okay.
Maybe the other piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. To the point, you know, as you go up, Mike, you know, there's active conversations around a future Bay Area transportation funding measure, because probably with the exception of WETA, every transit agency is hitting some form of a fiscal cliff. And so we're, you know, I think we're all engaged in figuring out how to avoid that. And that, you know, you don't really avoid it without funding. And I think a lot of folks think, well, WETA doesn't need any additional funding because they got regional measure 3. But to do the kind of things we're talking about here, and to Jeff's point about, you know, the money, you know, 300 million in capital sounds like a lot of money. It used to be, but it'll go quickly. You know, if we, it's not going to get any cheaper to build probably. So, you know, we need to be very cognizant of that and make sure that folks know that we're, you know, this funding only gets us through a certain point of period of time. It doesn't get us to the, you know, potential vision.
I would also like to stress that WETA isn't looking to expand just for the sake of expansion. WETA is working with the region to figure out what makes the most sense from an environmental, equity, transit, ridership, whatever it is, perspective, right? That we're here to work as a partner, a regional partner, to make our transit infrastructure stronger. And so partnerships is what makes projects. And so I think that's absolutely true, that it needs to be a strong component of the service vision and the business plan, that these things will not just happen because WETA says so. This is about terminals, locations, what's at the terminals, how do people access and move around near our terminals, and what are the environmental implications? What are the equity implications of this new expansion? So I think we really need to show that we're here as a partner. And I agree with, let me see if I can get the name here correctly, Howard Wong, that that there is enormous potential to grow, especially with zero emission, decarbonized fleet, as well as smaller vessels, and with different technology where wake and waves are things of the past. We already know how hard WETA or our crews are working to make sure that wake is not an issue as they're going through the Oakland estuary and in other sensitive areas. And so all of this is stuff that we need to take into account in the future. And it's not about expanding WETA's budget just for the sake of expansion. It's about growing where it makes sense.
Indeed. Absolutely. Only where it's practical. So go ahead, Mike.
Just, I think a lot of the concerns expressed do fall into place in the process we have here. And, this is just kind of a roadmap for the rest of the work we have planned for the year. Even though we've been a year and a half into this project, next June is kind of actually a starting point of the actual business plan. If we get to that service vision that articulates and expresses your vision for what we should strive to be in the future, then we can start really building out the actual business plan that shows how we get there. And, I know we said we weren't going to talk about RM3, but I just want to kind of remind from the first workshop we did, we did a very high level kind of analysis on how far RM3 gets us with just the existing system. And, I think we fall off the cliff 20.
23rd, 23rd.
And that's just to continue operating what we operate. So there will need to be more funding. There will need to be partnerships. And to Director Del Bono's point, there will be expectations on projects about what they can bring to the table as well. And, when you think about the service vision as a starting point, the business plan is going to set forth those criteria. How does a project in the vision move forward? What are the WETA's expectations for partners? What can the partners' expectations from WETA? And provide some transparency about how projects can get moving forward and introduce some different operating models. We heard consistently throughout the process from our stakeholders, they want more options than just 400 passenger boat operated by WETA. They're pilot projects, they're small boats, they're alternate service models that we can do. And I think the business plan is an opportunity to really get creative about how we can move some of these projects forward so that don't necessarily look like what we've always done. And I think this graphic is a nice representation of, potential paths forward. Depending on what that criteria looks like, depending on how aggressive we want to be in the early years in using the funding we have, the trajectory of delivering that service vision can look a lot different. And this is where the business plan will really be an opportunity to again set forth that criteria and come up with a phasing plan that leverages the money we have and serves as an advocacy tool to get a piece of the next funding measure that comes forward or other sources of funding. And so I'll let you have any final remarks.
Sure. Anything else from members of the board? Jessica?
No additional comments. I appreciate that, Mike. It sums it up perfectly. There's no straight line to where we're heading in 2050. And it all comes down to what the regional needs are and expectations are, and then where funding is available and where it makes sense to grow. So I think that's perfect.
Thank you. I will note for the record, we did receive a letter from Andrew Thomas, who is the City of Alameda's Planning, Building and Transportation Director, explaining their support, his city's support for the Plan Bay Area Network approach, a more limited approach to make sure that everything that we're doing, we managed to do well over time. So that letter will be a part of the record. I did want to just congratulate the organization for hitting a high water day in terms of ridership in recent numbers last week. So clearly ridership's on the uptake. We have a lot to do, but I think it's a credit to the staff, to Blue and Gold, the workers on the system who do a consistently great job. We're attracting people back, and the more people who come back, the more people who come back, it builds on itself. So I'm upbeat about San Francisco's recovery over time, and a believer that we'll be back strong in the future in terms of this economy, and that people will use transit, and that we will be very successful no matter which direction we take. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. We'll adjourn the meeting.
If I can catch
Thank
the
you.
340.
Ooh.
Oh, good one.
Hold it for you.
Berkeley thing, which actually sucked up a lot of our